The first people who arrived that night thought they were responding to a welfare concern, a report of screaming. Nothing more, nothing less. The call had come from Coventry. A woman had been heard screaming inside a flat. Police were dispatched. When officers arrived, a man met them at the door. He appeared distressed, agitated. According to evidence later heard in court, he told them he was experiencing a mental health crisis. The officers entered the property. The flat was dark. There was no electricity. The rooms were cluttered with rubbish. Broken glass littered parts of the floor. A bucket was being used as a toilet. Everything about the environment suggested disorder. The officers searched, room by room, area by area. Then eventually they left. The call appeared resolved, but what nobody in that moment understood was how close they had come. The significance of that search wouldn't become clear for another 5 weeks. 5 weeks later, she would be found buried in woodland. And when investigators reconstructed the timeline, one detail stood out from everything else. The police had already been there. Welcome to the Hidden Chapters, uncovering the truth behind every crime. Hours earlier, nothing about Reanne's evening appeared remarkable. On May 21st, 2025, she attended a church support group in Coventry. People spoke with her, saw her, interacted with her. There was no indication that these would become some of the final confirmed sightings of her alive. For the people who knew her, Reanne was not defined by what happened next. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister. The kind of person whose absence would immediately be noticed. That night, after leaving the support group, she met Mohammed Durnian. At approximately 11:20 p.m., she entered his flat on Paynes Lane. Court proceedings would later establish that within a short period of time, violence erupted inside the property. What exactly happened in those moments remains known only to the people who were there. But the physical evidence left behind would eventually tell its own story. And it was a story investigators would spend months piecing together. The next morning, Reanne's absence didn't immediately feel alarming. People miss calls, phones die, plans change, life gets busy. At first, there was no reason to believe anything was wrong. But as the hours passed, something felt off. Then a day passed. Then another. Messages remained unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. And gradually, the silence became harder to explain. The people closest to Reanne started doing what families always do when somebody unexpectedly disappears: calling friends, checking social media, revisiting recent conversations, trying to identify the moment everything changed. Then came her birthday. For most people, birthdays leave a digital trail, small reminders that people are thinking about you. But when Reanne's birthday arrived, there was nothing. No reply, no acknowledgement, no sign that she had even seen the messages. For her family, that silence felt different. The possibility they had been avoiding was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Eventually, detectives began working backwards through Reanne's final known movements. Where had she been? Who had she spoken to? Who had seen her last? The answers consistently pointed to the same night, May 21st, and the same address, the flat on Paynes Lane. Investigators reviewed CCTV footage, examined phone records, tracked movements, compared timelines. And with every new piece of information, the window around Reanne's disappearance became smaller. The timeline wasn't expanding. It was narrowing. The focus kept returning to the same property. The same location police had already visited after reports of screaming. At that stage, investigators still didn't know where Reanne was, but they were beginning to suspect she hadn't left voluntarily. Evidence was starting to suggest something else. Something had happened after she entered that flat. The question was what? The answer began emerging from digital evidence. Phone records created a timeline. Location data created another. CCTV footage created a third. Separately, none of them explained what happened. Together, they began pointing in the same direction, away from Coventry, toward an area known as Binley Woods. Detectives didn't arrive there by instinct. They arrived there by elimination. Every lead that survived scrutiny seemed to move in the same direction. And eventually, that trail brought investigators to a quiet stretch of woodland. From a distance, there was nothing unusual about it. Trees, undergrowth, narrow paths winding through the landscape, the kind of place people pass without remembering. For 37 days, nobody knew that this patch of woodland was connected to Reanne Coulson. Then investigators started digging. The discovery transformed the investigation. The search for a missing woman was over. The search for answers was not. Forensic specialists carefully excavated the area. Every fragment recovered from the site mattered. Every detail had the potential to explain what happened after Reanne entered the flat on Payne's Lane. For Reanne's family, the waiting had finally ended. The uncertainty had not. Pathologists were tasked with reconstructing events that nobody else had witnessed. What they discovered changed the direction of the investigation. The examination identified injuries to Reanne's head and neck. The findings established that significant violence had occurred before death. But there was another finding, one that suggested the events of that night continued after the violence ended. Evidence indicated attempts had been made to burn parts of the body. Specialists concluded the damage occurred after death. To investigators, that distinction mattered. The injuries explained violence. The burning suggested concealment. Somebody hadn't simply tried to end a life. Investigators believed somebody had also tried to hide what happened afterward. And every attempt to hide the truth created new evidence. Not less, more. The question now was no longer what happened to Reanne. The forensic evidence had already begun answering that. The question was who had been involved after the violence was over. And detectives believed the timeline was about to answer that too. Months later, a jury would hear the evidence, the phone records, the CCTV footage, the forensic findings, the movements made after Reanne's death. And after weeks of testimony, jurors reached their verdicts. Mohammed Durnian was found guilty of manslaughter. Adam Moore was found guilty of assisting an offender. For Reanne's family, the verdict brought accountability. It did not bring closure to every question. Some questions never receive complete answers, and one detail continued to stand apart from everything else. Not the grave, not the woodland, not even the trial. The police visit, the report of screaming, the search. Because when investigators eventually reconstructed the timeline, they arrived at a deeply unsettling conclusion. The most important location in the entire case had been identified on the very first night. Police had already been there. They had walked through the property, seen the conditions inside, searched the rooms, and then left. How could officers come so close to the truth and still miss it? West Midlands Police later reviewed the circumstances surrounding that attendance and expressed regret that Reanne's body had not been discovered during the original search. Yet even after the verdict, even after the investigation, even after the woodland grave was found, that question remained. How close can somebody come to finding the truth and still walk away from it? And somewhere inside that dark flat in Coventry, the answer was already waiting, long before anyone knew it. And that is what makes this case so difficult to forget.
If this case stayed with you, you're not the only one. And if you're ready for the details most people miss, there's more waiting in the full Hidden Chapters playlist.